Hello! How's it going, guys? Today I thought I'd switch it up a little bit. Some of my longtime viewers might know I haven't really been streaming that much lately. And that's mostly due to the fact that I'm a huge fucking nerd and I've been doing nerd shit. And I thought I would share that nerd shit with you guys. So, space is a big passion of mine, right? I've been stargazing for as long as I can remember, and just generally like looking through telescopes and stuff. But recently, I've discovered astrophotography, like within the last 4 months or so, and I feel like I've gotten proficient enough where I wanted to kind of make a beginner's guide, just a general overview about what it's about, the general process of it, and my personal workflow. So I haven't scripted any of this. I just kind of thought it'd be fun to do. But yeah, let me get started. So first things first, your gear, right? Unfortunately, most phone cameras aren't gonna cut it. You can get some decent results. Like don't get me wrong, I've seen some pretty solid pictures people have done just through their phone camera, and I think I've had my fair share of attempts. But the big downside of a phone camera is that you can't really change the settings too much. The zoom isn't that great, and it's just not what you want. Here's an example of what you might expect doing astrophotography just with a phone camera. You can make out the Orion Nebula and a shooting star. That's pretty cool. That's really interesting. This is actually the photo that got me into astrophotography. But you want a pretty solid setup with a DSLR camera, and as a beginner setup, you want a DSLR camera and a solid mount. Now, I messed up when I purchased my stuff, right? I thought, oh yeah, I need to spend all my money on a big telescope, because the bigger the telescope, the better the pictures. Let me show you guys what I got. Hang on my headphones real quick. I got this big boy. The SV Bony SV503 refractor. Now, don't get me wrong. This thing is fucking amazing. I love this. But it's heavy. I'm saying it's about 6 pounds, and that is a lot of weight in the grand scheme of things. As compared to a DSLR camera where the whole thing is 6 pounds, this is just too much weight. And why does weight matter for astrophotography? Let me talk about that for a second. So, to do the images that you're seeing in the bottom right corner right here, you need to stack and compile images and stuff. Toast Waffle said, "Are those photos you're showing actually yours? If so, that's really impressive." Yes, that is. They're all actually in my photos. Right now, that's a picture of the green comet you might have heard of in the news lately. There's another one. I should probably slow it down so I can actually talk about the images, but we'll get to those later. Yeah, I took them all myself, processed them all myself, taught myself. I appreciate the compliment. But as I was saying, weight is extremely important for astrophotography because you need a mount. The mount is the most important part of gearing your kit. Because what the mount does, your whole optical rig, so the telescope and the camera, or the lens and the camera, is on top of this mount, right? And then the mount will turn and slowly go in the opposite direction of the movement of the stars so that you can do long exposure images. All of the photos taken down here, they're about 30 seconds each stacked on top of each other. So if you did a 30-second wide open image, you would get what's called a star trail, which is where the star slowly makes like a circle. The mount that I recommend for beginners, it's gonna have to be the I'm talking about astrophotography.
You streaming?
Yeah. That's my brother. He's a dork. But the mount that I recommend for beginners is the Star Adventure 2i Pro Pack. Now, I should preface this. Astrophotography is not a cheap hobby, although I wish it was. This little thing right here, plus attachments sold the camera and stuff, will run you about $500. But what this does, this can hold about 11 pounds at max payload capacity, but you don't want to be using it at its max capacity. As a general rule of thumb, it's said that you should use about half of what your mount's advertised payload capacity is. So since this can run about 11 pounds at its max payload capacity, for my setup, my camera, lens, and attachments are all about 6 pounds total, 5 pounds, so nothing crazy. But yeah, you mount a bracket that goes through here. It holds your camera, and if I power this on, you can't really see it, but it would slowly turn. And so let me talk about the next most important piece of gear. It's the camera. The DSLR camera is really important. I shoot with a Nikon D3300 DSLR with a 55 to 200 millimeter zoom lens. You can get this whole setup for around $500 used. The lens brand new is $200 and the camera brand new is $500. So you can, this is a pretty decent beginner option. I wouldn't recommend this exact model because I only use it because it's what I have. I got it as a hand-me-down, so I can't complain. I mean, I get good results, but DSLR camera, and the lens is also very important because I would specifically do research on how whatever lens you're looking at performs for specifically astrophotography, because certain lenses will have higher noise or vignetting or what's called chromatic aberration, which is where the colors just kind of get all wonky, and you don't want that. So this is what I shoot with. I wouldn't fully recommend it, but this is a general idea of what you want to be using. And then finally, you want a sturdy tripod. Again, I wouldn't recommend this specific model. I got it off Amazon for under $100, and it served me well. But as I move up to higher payloads, like when I'm eventually going to use my telescope, you're gonna want a really sturdy mount. That'll run you about $100, give or take. All right, let me put this away. And then there are a couple of attachments and accessories that you're gonna want to have. Okay, let me pull out a couple here. So this is what your payload will sit on. This bar screws in to the bottom of this bracket, and the bracket slides through the gap into the mount, and then the camera gets attached through these screws right here, and you're good to go. This is a polar scope illuminator. So inside of your oh, mine's almost dead, but you can see faintly glows red. What that does is before you can turn on your mount, you have to do what's called polar alignment. So after you've set it up and put it together, take it outside, you want a clear view of the North Star Polaris. You're going to line up the front of your mount. You'll see there's a hole right there, and on the back this bracket comes off and it looks like an eyepiece, because it is. You look through this eyepiece and you have to align the mount itself with the North Celestial Pole. That's because if you had it, like, let's say the North Pole was right here, right? If I was aligned like this, and I turned the mount on and started trailing this way, but the stars are going complete other axis, so your tracking is basically useless. So polar scope illuminator basically lights up the inside of this so that you can see a reticle, which will display where the North Star basically needs to go. Let me put the cap back on. And then the final accessory I want to talk to you about is an intervalometer. Now, you can get by with a remote shutter release, which is how I started off. This picture right here actually was taken just using a remote shutter release and individually taking each light frame, but that sucks. And especially in the winter when it's 20 degrees outside, 30 degrees outside, I don't want to be outside individually clicking a button every 30 seconds. So what an intervalometer will do is it plugs into the side of your camera. You can program it to do a certain number. I can't really get it to display on camera, but it'll do a certain number of frames over a certain time period, and then it'll stop. All right. So you're outside, you've set up your gear, you're all good to go, right? Yeah. The first thing that you want to do is focus your camera. So after polar aligning, I would just find the closest bright star, which would honestly be Polaris, because you're already lined up right there. So turn on your camera, set it to live mode. Actually, I can demonstrate. So once your camera is on, most will have a button right here. It kind of looks like a TV. It says LV on it. That means live. You click that button. Oh, you gotta open the frame. And now when I press it, you'll see a live view through the camera, right? You're gonna take this, you're gonna zoom in as far as you can on a really bright star, and then slowly dial in the focus. If you are struggling to get focus, there's an attachment called a Batonov mask, which will basically diffract the light of the star into a pattern, and then when that pattern forms a cross, you'll know you have perfect focus. But for my purposes and at such a low focal length, I don't think it's really necessary. Let me also talk about camera settings for astrophotography. Having your camera set to manual is absolutely critical. If you're just going by the automatic settings, you're not gonna get anything good. Some settings I'd recommend changing once you're in manual. Manually change the exposure to about 5 to 30 seconds. I would also change the ISO settings. Let me pull it up here. I would manually change the ISO settings, which is this bar right here, to between 800 and 3200. The higher the number, the more sensitive the sensor on the camera is to light. So if you have that too high, you're going to be seeing a lot of noise in your photo, but if you have it too low, you won't be able to really make out too much detail. So between 8 and 3200 is good for most cameras, but you can look up for specifically your camera what you need. I would turn off manual white balance because we will be doing that manually later in processing. Another setting I would change is any like automatic adjustment settings. It varies by brand, but generally like automatic noise removal, etc. That will waste a lot of your battery, and we can remove that in post-processing by ourselves and save our battery life for taking pictures. So okay, your gear's set up, camera's ready. Take the picture off, or take the cap off, you zoom in on your target, you're focused in. What do you do now? So now we're gonna plug in the intervalometer into a side port right here. It'll generally be on the left side on the top. It's this port right here. And you're gonna set that to how many light frames you want to do. So let's say for our purposes, we're shooting the Orion Nebula and we want 10 minutes of exposure on it. So okay, we would say if we're doing 30-second exposures for each picture, we would do 20 exposures at 30 seconds. And then another key thing that I messed up the first time I shot was you have to set the interval on the intervalometer to be higher than the bulb setting on the intervalometer, because it takes time for the camera to process and write down the information that it's processing. So if you set the bulb time, which is the exposure time, to be 30 seconds, and you also set the interval time to be 30 seconds, your frames would all be cut short so that the camera has time to process the image it just took and store it. Okay, so now you're taking your light frames, and that's good. You're going to be seeing something like this. Let me pull up some example pictures here. This one's probably good. All right, you're going to be seeing something kind of like this. You should be able to, on brighter targets, and if you're in good light condition areas, you should be able to see glowing regions, and all the stars should be small points. If they're not, like if this was stretched so it was more oval-y or something like that, you might want to check your tracking or maybe take some weight off of your setup because it could be causing tracking issues. So this is, I think this was 15 seconds of exposure for this specific frame. This is what you want to see. All right, let me go back here. So before we can start processing and stacking images, we want to take what's called bias frames. Bias frames help filter out the noise and the errors in the image. So if we just stacked all of the images together, there would be a lot of noise. So we take what's called dark frames, flat frames, and bias frames. This is my dog Dixie. She wants attention. Hold on. Give me just 1 second. Come on, girl. Let's go. Okay, so as I was saying, we want to take, oh my god, I think I was calling them bias frames. Their name is calibration frames because they calibrate the stacking software that you're using. So you take dark frames, which is where you use the same exact settings as you were using for your light frames, except you put the lens cap on. So if we were shooting at 1600 ISO for 15 seconds, we're just going to put the lens cap on, shoot at 1600 ISO for 15 seconds. And we'll take not necessarily as many of those, but you still want a good 5 minutes of dark frames for your first project. I think would be very good. The next calibration frame is called a bias frame. This is where you keep the lens cap on, but you stop down the shutter speed to as fast as your camera can go. So for me, that's 1/4000, so that's 1/4000th of a second. And those should be relatively quick, so I'd recommend taking about 60 of them. And then the last thing you want to do is take a flat frame. Now this one can be very tricky, and personally, I don't use flat frames for every project, but for longer projects that I've already poured tons of time into, I would definitely recommend using them. How those work is you take the lens cap back off, and then you can honestly use any setting, but you hold up a flat white screen over the camera so that it's just a pure white picture, and you can just use automatic settings to get however long of an exposure your camera needs to fully capture the white. Okay, so now we have all these photos. What do we do with them? So take the SD card out of your camera, and since I'm working on a desktop, I need an adapter. So I'm just gonna plug this in real quick, and we can. So we're here, right? Just got the file open, and it should look something like this. It'll just be a ton of raw files. And let's see, what was I shooting last time? Okay, so I was looking at the full moon 2 nights ago. That was a very bad picture, by the way. But you're gonna want to take your files and organize them. So what I do is I like to take the light frames and create a folder named light. So let me see here. Where is the last light frame? I'm gonna guess it's around here. Oh, a little bit before. Alright, so I did 40 light frames. And now not all of these will be used for processing. I think, if I remember correctly, I've already gone through this data and filtered out the really bad ones. When I'm talking about bad frames, that would mean like if there's a satellite going by overhead, or maybe if there was just a lot of clouds when you're shooting, you're not going to want to use those light frames. Next, we're going to create a file for our dark frames. And here we go again. I think I did 20 of these, so let me check. You can, if you don't remember what it was supposed to be, like if you don't remember, if you can't tell the difference between a dark and a light frame, you can always go to the properties tab of the pictures and check the exposure time. Your dark frames will have much longer exposure time. So look at this. So that one had a 15-second exposure. This one is 1/4000. So this is where the bias frames start. So let me close that. Okay. So here until here, we know those are our dark frames. Next is bias frames. And I think all of these are bias frames. Now I only got 17 because my battery died, but please take more. All right. And it looks like I had a file in here called Weird Blip. Oh yeah, there was some like light that appeared in this image. I think it was from a plane, now that I think about it, but that's for another time. So now you have all these files organized, right? Your bias, your dark, your light. So what do we do now? How do we turn that into a final image? So you're going to need some specialized software. What I recommend for beginners is a free software called Deep Sky Stacker. Deep Sky Stacker. Here we go. Processing. This thing is great. What this allows you to do is take all of your lights. Actually, I just realized my camera is covering this up, so let me move it over a little bit. This sidebar right here is where you're going to add in all of your pictures. So on the left, you see it says open picture files. That is your light frames. I've got to go, but this is awesome stuff you're doing. Keep up the great work. It's nice seeing you. Thanks for stopping by. All right, but we're going to open up our light frames, and it looks like I've already done some processing here. Let me go to that file that we just created. So you're going to find the file for, well, can't show you it, but you're going to find the file for your SD card, open it up, and we're going to go to that folder we just created. Go into light frames. We're just going to drag and select all of them, and then click open in the bottom right. And now you'll see that they're all right here. Perfect. So now we're going to click dark files, and then in that, from that same folder that you got your light frames, we're going to navigate to dark frames, and then same thing, just click and drag to select all of them and click open in the bottom right, and you'll see the software automatically recognizes them as dark frames, and they get put in this file list. Finally, we're going to use offset/bias frames. So let me open that up. Bias frames. And then, as I said, use more than I did. 17 is probably enough, but more is better. So now we're going to click check all, and that'll check all of these images. And now click register stacked pictures. This will pull up, you guys can't see the tab that I can see. Let me do this. I'm gonna actually add a screen capture. Sorry about this, I didn't plan ahead enough, I guess. So I'm just going to show you guys my entire screen real quick. It's going to open up this. gonna say select the best. By default, it'll say 100%, but I like to use around 90. For projects where you have more light frames, I would lower that number down to maybe 85 or 80, so that you're really only using the cream of the crop. But for this test image, this is good. And now in the advanced setting, in the star detection threshold, we're going to click compute the number of detected stars. And now it's going to scan through the image real quick, and it'll show us how many stars that the software picks up. Now, we want this number to be around 100 stars. So I'm going to bump this down a little bit and see where that takes us. 124. I'm going to move it down to maybe 35, and that should be good. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And now we're going to go to recommended settings. And in this tab right here, some of these where it's green on my screen, there will be red settings for you. So you're going to want to click on those. The software can automatically detect what types of images you're using and stuff like that. So it's going to give you recommendations for settings to change. And now I'm not a genius. I don't know specifically what these settings do, but go by the recommended settings. So we're going to click OK, and it'll take us back to here. Now we're going to run by clicking OK. I'm going to review this. So this was a total exposure of about 9 minutes, and it says this process will temporarily use 5.8 gigabytes. That's fine. Make sure you have a lot of storage for this. This is a very storage intensive hobby. We're going to click OK. And it's off to the races. So this will take a while to run. Like genuinely a long time. Maybe not so much for these shorter projects. Like for only 9 minutes of exposure, it probably won't be that much. But as you progress more and more and you add in more data, it'll take a long time. So we're gonna let that run. In the meantime, I'll pull up some pictures that I've taken and kind of give an overview of what I've done and what I do to store my photos, or to store my final images. I would not recommend using Google Drive to hold images before you process them, because that is a lot of storage. We're talking about hundreds of gigabytes of stuff here. But here we go. This right here is the Andromeda Galaxy. Personally, I'm not too happy with how this one turned out, but I'm a fan of the colors and how you can make out the fainter edges of the galaxy. If I were to redo this project, I would use a lower ISO setting, because if we zoom in here, you can see there is a lot of thermal noise, and that comes from using too high of an ISO setting, or just not taking enough calibration frames. So that's what I would change. But here is my first attempt at stacking and photographing the Orion Nebula. I took this December 29th, and my first attempt at processing the data didn't go too well. I wasn't able to bring out hardly any color in the image. Let me see if I still have that first attempt. It should be, no, that's my camera. Here we go. So this was my first attempt. You can see there really is not a whole lot of color here. It looks very desaturated, but that's a quick fix. You can just increase the saturation in post-processing. And then here's a more recent image of Orion that I did. I actually prefer this one a lot more than the other. While the colors aren't as like explosive and mind-blowing, I really like this one because it brings out the fainter regions along the side here and a lot more detail in here without blowing out the core. I feel like this one brings out the natural colors a lot more than this one, where it's kind of oversaturated. So yeah, this is my most recent take on Orion. If you've been following the news lately, specifically in space or basically anywhere, they've been talking about the green comet, and this is what that is. So this is comet C 2022 E3 ZTF. The 2022 is the year that it was discovered. E3, don't remember what it stands for, and ZTF was the observatory credited with discovering it. Here's one of the first images that I took of Orion. I processed a lot of images with the same setup to make a star trail images, and this is what really got me hooked on astrophotography. But this was a single 3-second exposure, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Next up, I took this at a local astronomy meeting. If you zoom in here, well, Google Drive's kind of messing up the resolution, but this faint fuzzy blob right here, you might recognize it from one of the earlier images. That's the comet. Due to the location of the observatory that I take pictures from sometimes, we have to kind of peek through the trees at targets in the north part of the sky. So it's not great, but I'm kind of a fan of this because you have the foreground and the background, and I think it just turned out as a nice shot. Not really so much astrophotography, but it was nice. And then here we go. This was a very difficult project for me. It was the most data I've ever used. This was about 35 minutes, and these two stars right here form up the last two stars to the left of Orion's belt. These regions of space are called the Flame and the Horsehead Nebula. And then at the top right here, you can make out what's called the Running Man Nebula. You might recognize that from these pictures. That's because they're in the same general area. But yeah, this one was a lot of data for me. And again, I messed up the settings a bit because there's a lot of noise. And I'm not sure if that came from the settings while I was taking the pictures or from afterwards when I was processing, but this one was very difficult for me and didn't quite turn out as well, but still proud of it. And then I talked about that one. Actually, let me go into a little bit more detail here. This is the star trails I was talking about earlier. So this is just showing off the general movement of the stars across the night sky. If you have good memory, you can make out the 3 stars in Orion's belt right here. And then down here is actually the Orion Nebula. I accomplished this picture by taking, I think it was probably 5 3-minute exposures, and then stacking them all together in a program called Star Stacks, which is also free, and it's meant for generating images like this. And then finally, here's a work in progress I'm doing. That is a wide open shot of the Orion Nebula. So you can see that there's not as much detail, but you can make out the whole region, which I'm a big fan of. All right, so that's some of the stuff that I've done. Let me go back to that stacked image we were working on. So as you can see, it finished up. Now you're gonna notice that there's no color in this, or oh crap, or that there's hardly any color. Don't click on the screen because it'll create this box and it'll mess up the output, but I already have a backup image saved, so we're good. You should be able to see like the really bright parts, and everything else should be very black and white. So what we're going to do is we're going to click in the left side here, save, or yeah, we're going to click save picture to file right here. It's under the chat box, so let me just move this up a little bit. We'll click save picture to file. It'll save the file as a .tiff file, which is a raw file. I forgot to mention at the start of this, Deep Sky Stacker, which is the program that we're working with here, only communicates in raw files. So if you're trying to take JPEG images of stars, that's not going to really work out. So okay, we got the stacked image here. Now we're going to open it in an image manipulation program, such as Photoshop, or if you can't afford Photoshop, like me, we're going to use a file, or we're going to use a program called GIMP. So let me open that up. Now, GIMP doesn't natively use raw images, so you're going to have to use an add-on called Darktable, which is basically a plugin for GIMP that lets you use raw files. So now we're going to click File, Open, or we're going to click, File, Open. We're going to go to wherever you stored your image. Space, Stacks, and here we go. Here's the image file from my latest Orion image. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of setup for this. Normally you're not gonna have, hold up here. Normally you're not gonna have this stuff in the bottom right. You might see other filters, but we want to pull up the histogram. So I think it'll be in Windows, Dockable Dialogues, and then histogram. Our goal is to stretch the data in the image so it highlights a certain wavelength. So we're gonna click colors, levels, and we're gonna move this mid-tone slider. Oh crap, I just realized you all can't see that. Here we go. We're gonna move what's called the mid-tone slider over quite a bit, so to about right here, and you can see that brightens up the image, and immediately we're seeing a lot more of that nebulosity. So let me do this again a couple of times, and generally you want the peak to be around this area. So okay, we've moved the data over a lot, and you can see that the whole image is bright, and our goal is not to have a super bright, overexposed image. We want space to be dark, because space is dark to our naked eye. So we're going to drag this black point slider over, and be careful not to trim off any data. We're just going to move it over to about right there. And while we're at it, now that I have it on my mind, we're going to name this first layer Levels. Or we're going to name it First Stretch. My bad. And we're going to keep stretching that until we're happy with it. So pinch it over a little more. Levels, colors, or colors and levels. We're going to do that a couple more times. And you see that each time we're doing this, we're bringing out more and more of the image. And right now, actually, I'm going to do a quick crop of the image. So the file that I'm working with right here is from data from multiple nights. So you can see at the top, there's this kind of bar separating it. This is because the two files that I used didn't exactly line up when I framed the images. So we're just gonna trim it slightly to eliminate that. Okay, that looks good. And now we're just gonna keep stretching. So a little bit more over, a little bit over here. And I'm happy with that for a first stretch. So now we're going to do what's called a curves adjustment. So click new layer, or you're going to right click on the layer in the bottom right here, and then click new from visible. This will create a new layer, and we're going to name this one curves. Now we're going to go back up to that same area where we found the levels. We're going to click curves. So generally we're going to be wanting to stretch up the parts of the image that are fainter, and we're going to be pulling down the background end of it. of the image. So if you left click, you can see right around here is where the really faint parts of the image are. So we're going to drag those up. You can see that makes them brighter. And then also in this image, we're starting to bring out parts of the Flame and Horsehead Nebula. And now I don't know if I'll include those in the final image, but they're there for now. We're going to do that again. This time I'm going to click on the Running Man Nebula. Do something like that. And now, okay, it's really bright. So we're going to do a curves adjustment. And we're going to drag this black point over. We're going to keep an eye on this histogram and make sure we're not spilling off to the left or to the right at any point. Okay, that's good to me. We're going to do this a couple more times. I'm now going to select a background image, or a background of the image, where there are no bright stars and there's no bright nebulosity. So this is generally the background, and we want this to be pretty black. So we're actually going to drag down. And now that's a pretty radical adjustment. So I'm not going to do it maybe as much in one go. We're going to do something like that. And now you're really starting to see the texture of the clouds and the extremely bright core. And now we don't want that core to be extremely bright, actually. So I'm going to click colors, level, or colors, curves. We're going to click right here. We're going to drag down the very peak of the image. This will bring down just a little bit. I don't know if I actually like that. I'm good with that. Now we're starting to see the individual stars in the middle of the core, which is actually kind of hard to see when it's completely blown out from tons of exposure. So, okay. Now we're here. And now you might be saying, where's all the color in the image? Good question. We're about to put it there. So we're going to name this layer colors. And there's a lot of ways that you can do this. What I like to do is use the select by color tool, and this will generally select by similar light levels, and we're going to select until we have generally the stars and the nebula in the image, and we're going to click colors, saturation. I'm just going to bump that up, select none, and okay, you can see it's a little bit better between that and that, a little bit. We're going to actually increase the saturation of the whole image because everything is bad right now. So bump that up. Okay, now we're really starting to see the pinks and the magentas. Do this one more time. Be careful not to oversaturate, because if we do something like this, well, yes, that is a lot of color, and that's real pretty. It doesn't look that good, at least not to my eye. Each person can edit their image however they want, and to their eye, it could look a lot better than how I like to do it. But this is how I do it. All right, that's starting to look pretty nice, actually. I'm going to do another saturation. Okay, now you can see I overdid it a little here. All right, overdid it a little bit here. If you zoom in to the background, you're starting to see a lot of red and green and blue, and we just don't want to be seeing that in the background. We want that to be black. So I'm going to actually tone this down across the whole image, maybe to about right here. And I'm just going to selectively bump up certain parts. So like in this really faint part, there's, if I pull up a sample image here, there's these really faint parts on the outside. And we're going to try to bring those out a little bit. So select by color, You might want to increase or decrease your radius depending on how much of the image you select. Like if after this selection goes through, if I'm selecting like the whole image, I'm gonna really tone down that a lot. So I forgot to mention, for astrophotography, you want a good computer, and you also want to save your files often. It looks like I might have just crashed the program by selecting too large of an area. And now these files are large. These are large files, and to scan through and individually select by color each part of the image, that's a lot of work for. That's good. And now, if I zoom out here, you can really see this vignetting effect, and that's because I have a poor quality lens. So we're gonna try to mitigate that by doing another crop and focusing exclusively on this area. While I would like to include the flaming horse head in this image, with this setup, it's not very practical. So okay, now we're starting to get a really nice detail. I'm going to do another stretch of the data, I think. Let me look at the histogram. Yeah, I'm going to bring it back slightly. I'm going to try to balance out the colors, because you can see the reds are kind of farther shifted to the right, the blues are kind of shifted to the left, and the greens are in the middle. So we're going to try to bring those all together. We're going to go to colors, levels, and now you can individually select by color. So we're going to do red. I'm going to bring the black point up on there to about right here. Looks good to me, and then we're going to pinch it in. Okay. Now we're going to do green. Pull it in. Bring it like that. And our goal is to line all of these up together. Looks good. And then finally blue. Bring it over a little bit. About right there. And then bring it back this way. That looks good to me. And now you can really start to see the faint areas that I was talking about earlier with that sample image. Now, honestly, you could stop here if you wanted to. There's a couple of more things that we could do, such as gradient elimination. With that, you would select the color picker tool, select set foreground color. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to create a new layer named background neutralization. Now, there are plugins that can do this automatically for you that work really well. I've heard of Gradient X Terminator with just the letter X in front. I've seen some great results from that, and it basically removes the gradient in this image, so you can still see that vignetting effect, and this part of the image just isn't as dark as this part of the image, so it's just trying to balance it out. So we're going to do what's called a background neutralization. We're going to select color picker, set foreground color. I'm going to click about right here. Make sure to not click on a star because that'll mess it up. And then we're going to click set background color, and I'm going to set it to probably about right here. That looks good to me. Now we're going to create a new layer. We're going to click G to select the gradient tool. Click here. We're going to set foreground to background, and we're going to click and drag. So now you see the gradient of the image, and I'm going to click over here, subtract. You have to scroll down a little bit to find subtract, and we're going to play with this a little bit. Okay, I'm going to click OK, and we're going to do that same process again. So I'm going to select color picker, set foreground color. We're going to set this as the foreground, and set this as the background. Actually, we're gonna set this as the background. And here we go. Again, new layer. Crap, I forgot to merge down. You're gonna click merge down. Alright, so now you're gonna pull up the gradient tool again. Click and drag. And I might have gotten that flipped actually. I'm gonna do this and this. Yeah, I think that's better. Okay. Now I'm gonna click subtract. A little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Okay, and you see we're able to fix the gradient a little bit. I think I'm going to do one final background neutralization. Merge down. New front or new layer. Okay. Color picker. Set foreground. Right here. And we're going to do to about right here. G here. And we're gonna click subtract. I messed up somewhere. I'll be honest. We're just gonna go back a few stages. It's about right here. We're gonna do one final crop. So we really want to focus in on just the Orion Nebula. So we're gonna do a square. It's about a square. Bring it in a little bit. Boom. And now I want to bring out a little bit more color in the Running Man and maybe make this a little bit darker overall. So let's do levels. Almost black point adjustment. You can see from that background neutralization, we're able to do a lot better of a black point removal. Removal? That's not a word. I didn't say that right. We're going to select by color to bring out the really faint parts of the image. Color. Saturation. Okay, select none. And now you can see them a little bit better. I think I'll do that one more time. So same thing, click. Yeah. I'm happy with that. Drag it up a little bit. Select none. Okay. Now you can really see it. And I'm happy with that. Now, there's more that you could do. There are other programs I mentioned, like Gradient Exterminator. There's another one that I want to eventually be able to use called StarNet++, which removes all of the stars from your image. It basically splits your image into two files, one that contains deep sky objects and one that contains stars. And then you can work on those separately to bring out more of the nebulosity and stuff like that in nebulas and galaxies without overexposing the image or bumping up the saturation too much in the stars. So this looks pretty good to me. And now we're going to click File, Export As, and I'm going to name this Demonstration. And now we want to change the file type to probably a JPEG or a PNG if you want to be sharing it or storing it. So export as demonstration.jpg, and actually I just realized I stored this in the wrong location, so I'm going to go back through here. That's a good place for it. Export, and on this next screen, make sure that your quality slider is set to 100. If you bump it down to about 90, the file will get compressed, and we don't want that. We want a bigger file that shows off a lot of the fainter parts of the image. So now we're going to click export, and now if you go to your files, go to wherever you stored it, boom, and you're done. I'm actually quite happy with how this turned out. This was the my first attempt at Orion 2 months ago. Yeah, about 2 months ago. And then that's the demonstration image we took today. So again, this was only about 10 minutes of exposure, and for really, really good images, you want an hour plus. And if you want a more in-depth review and guide, I would check out channels such as Nebula Photos, run by Nico Carver. He does amazing guides, and he's actually where I learned a lot of my techniques. Or channels like Astro Backyard, they give a very concise and overview about how to take images. I don't think I've seen them do too many processing tutorials, but I'm not as familiar with their content. But both those guys, really recommended. And yeah, if you'd like to know anything else, please send me an email or send me a direct message through Twitch or YouTube. I will be editing and posting this later. Cool. Alright, I'm gonna actually end stream there. I got a lot of homework to do, and yeah, this is really fun. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos like this. I plan on streaming off of my phone and just going into my backyard and showing you guys, like, taking the pictures step by step, and then we'll take those actual photos and process them. And then maybe if I get a lot more money, I can do a full dedicated astronomy rig that can live stream through the telescope, which is really cool, and I really want to try that. But yeah, thanks for stopping by. I'll be ending the stream there. Thanks.